Hi, Spring fans. Welcome to another installment of Spring Tips. In this installment, we're going to take a look at a topic that's near and dear to my heart, namely integration. Some of you may recall that the very first video in this humble Spring Tip series looked at Spring integration, and we're going to revisit that topic, but we're going to focus particularly on one specific module. We're going to talk about FTP. Now, I can hear you belly aching. What does FTP have to do with cloud native applications today? Josh, why would you cover that? To which I say, it's not particularly cloud native, but you'd be surprised by how much of the world still runs on file synchronization based message exchange, right? So think about classic EAI, enterprise application integration, lore and history, and you'll find that there are about 4 different ways for services to communicate with each other. There's synchronous, commonly understood synchronous patterns like RPC, REST, and just basic XML, RPC, and things like this. This is request response. You make a request and you wait and get a response. There are other kinds of exchanges as well. There's also messaging, right? This is not controversial. So you've got things like Kafka, RocketMQ, JMS, RabbitMQ, etc. You've got database synchronization, not a very in vogue pattern, but it's still very common, right? I don't think it's a particularly great idea for different teams to share the same database, but you'd be surprised by how many services work that way. One team leaves a message in the right table, and the other API picks it up in that table and processes it accordingly. And then finally, we have what did we already do? We already mentioned databases, RPC messaging, and the fourth one, of course, is file synchronization. So this is a really common, right? Especially in financial services, you'll find this all over the place. In this pattern, you've got one service that leaves a file in a well-known location, a well-known directory, a well-known mount on a network file store, and another service picks it up and processes it. So it could be FTP or SFTP or FTPS or NFS or SMB, all these different kinds of networked file systems. And how you interact with these file systems is, it changes. Nowadays, you might actually use S3, right? That could be a staging ground. But you don't usually use S3 for exchange of messages in the way you might use FTP. But still, it's a network file system. It's worth mentioning. Normally, you use S3 for like storing binary data, which is, it's perfectly suited for that. So we have file synchronization, and I know this is a really old way of solving a problem, but it's just very interesting to me because it's one of those things where so much of the world runs on this kind of file synchronization. Batch processing is still a very big thing, but you can also do event-driven kind of processing. So somebody drops a new file into a directory, and then something in response to that event picks it up. And this is a classic use case for integration technologies like Spring integration. So what we're going to look at here is the FTP support. And if you'll indulge me here a little bit in my own horn tooting, right, thumping of my own chest here. I feel a little bit of pride when I talk about this because more than 10 years ago, in 2009, I had found the sort of dusted but not integrated code for FTP that Ewain Fold, one of the contributors to Spring integration at the time, had written and contributed. And I don't remember the exact history or the exact sort of lineage there, but basically he had written it, and maybe it was in Spring integration for a minute, but then they took it out because it was another module and they didn't have the bandwidth to maintain it. I don't know, but it seemed good enough. It seemed like it had a lot of potential. And I was planning on contributing something like that anyway, so I just took his as the baseline, polished it up a little bit, and then I also added FTPS and SFTP. So there's 3 modules basically, all having the same basic patterns, right? And that was the original contribution. So if you look at the bugs in that particular code, my name is all over the place, right? As you can imagine. But it has been more than a decade, and so I was very surprised to find that in the intervening decade, I thought once you've done FTP, you don't really need to touch it again. It's not like they have, whatever next gen FTP looks like. I don't know, but I don't think it changes that much, right? It's a very stable protocol. I thought we had done all that needed to be doing, but boy, was I, as usual, wrong. The team, the Spring integration team, Gary Russell, Artem Bilan, and so on, have done amazing things to that code. to the point where I don't recognize it anymore. They fixed all the bugs that I had created, uh, and they've made it just absolutely amazing. It is really, really, really cool. So I'm gonna look at the FTP support in this installment, but keep in mind that a lot of this applies to the SFTP and the FTPS supports. If you understand the idioms, then you'll have similar support for those other protocols. This is separate and apart from the file system support. So I can have Spring integration monitor a computer file system, regular local disk, be it on Mac or Windows or Linux. And I can do that already. That's another module. It's not the same as actually logging into an FTP server and then monitoring it, right? So what we're going to look at first is some support for the FTP server itself. Now, normally when you talk about FTP integration, and certainly when we added that code more than a decade ago, when we talk about FTP integration, what we're talking about is, having a client that connects to some installed FTP server somewhere else, that then monitors it and then publishes messages whenever it perceives a state change, whenever there's a new file, for example, or a file has been deleted or whatever. And that's very useful because you need some way of getting a notification that something has changed. You can let Spring integration poll that FTP server and tell you that something has changed. The only problem with this, of course, is that it's not as fast as actually having the FTP server tell you, if it could. And second of all, you might miss something in between polls, right? Something might have been added and then deleted in the 1 second between your polls, right? If you have or whatever, you can have every millisecond, you can have it every minute, right? You can have the FTP client log in, scan the directory, and then say, hey, there's 5 files here. There were 6. Something is different. I'll publish an event, right? That's the basic way the client-based monitoring works. But wouldn't it be cooler if the FTP server could actually tell you something has changed, right? It could publish an event, and you can't do this for everything. But if the FTP server that you're using is the Apache FTP Server project, then you're in luck. Apache FTP Server is a open source project, of course, Apache licensed, and it is based on Apache Mina. Now, Apache Mina is actually Trustin Lee, famously the creator of Netty. It was the precursor to Netty, so he actually worked on that at Apache first, and then went to Netty, and went on and created Netty. And so, very, very cool project. Super fast, right? So there's an FTP server. I don't, and again, I could be wrong. Forgive me. I think, and I could be wrong. I might be wrong. I could be remembering this incorrectly, but to my mind, at some point, I think the FTP server was like a demo for Apache Mina. But now it looks to be a fairly standalone thing. So Apache FTP server. Okay, so oh yeah, there it is. It's a it has its own entry, but it is under Mina. Yeah, so I guess it's still part of it. I don't know. Anyway, it's a very cool project. You can use it by itself. As they also have nice support for Spring and so on. So and because it's a Java API, you can just use it in your code very easily. So what I've got is an FTP server here. I've already gotten most of the code written. I customized it myself. And I'm not going to write all this code with you right now because there's very little of interest in this. I'm going to show you what it is, but suffice it to say that at some point, I've got a FTP server. The FTP server looks for any FTPlets in the context. In particular, we want one, so I make sure to inject that one. There's also a user manager and some other stuff related to how to mount the file system to the view that the FTP server exposes to the clients, right? How to mount my local file system and how to map that to the view that the people on the FTP clients actually see. So if I have a directory X on my local file system, how does that show up? What directory does it correspond to? Is that the root of the user's directory in the FTP client or what, right? That file system factory is pluggable, right? So you can actually provide your own or just use an existing one or whatever. I created I just used a native file system factory here. I told it to create the home directory, made it case insensitive, and it's creating a file system view. I told this thing to start up in port 7777 as opposed to the normal FTP port. And I've taken all the FTPlets and I've provided them actually. So I don't actually really need multiples here, right? I just need a map that actually works. So anyway, I've got now this very simple FTP server, and it's going to start up and it's going to do its work, but it's not going to tell us anything. It doesn't give us any events when something happens. Spring integration now has, in the latest modules, support for actually listening for those events. So you can adapt the FTP server lifecycle changes. If a file gets deleted or added or renamed or whatever, you get an event that gets turned into an application context event, right? And then we can use the application context event adapter in Spring integration to turn that event into an actual message that gets broadcast to any other Spring integration code. So if I have another component in my integration pipeline, it can listen for messages upstream from the application context event. So let's actually now, with that idea in mind, let's actually go ahead and introduce that one little bit less of support. Okay, so we're going to call this integration configuration, and it's just a regular Java class at configuration. All right, and it's just a regular Java class. So all we're going to do is install our Apache Mina FTPlet. Okay. And okay, there's this. And it's going to be a Spring message channel. Okay. And return this. So return message channels. .direct.get. Okay, there's that. And we want a thing that'll take our Apache Mina events and broadcast them into Spring integration. So I'll use the application event listening message producer. Okay. And here, I'm going to create a producer. And we can actually just take this, close that. All right, producer dot set event types and Apache Mina FTP event dot class and producer dot set output channel and message channel. So this is, let's give this a better name. I'm going to call this the events channel, I guess. Okay, good. I'm going to just return the producer. Alrighty, good stuff. So there's that. Now we need an integration flow. Okay. Return, and we're just going to take the events that come out of the application event listening message producer. We're going to take those events and then respond to them. So from this dot events channel, we're just going to log them out, I guess. We don't need to do anything special here. I just want to show you that we can, because then you could actually, if you understand how to do this, all I'm doing is I'm taking whatever comes out of that channel and I'm processing it. Well, I could, of course, now send those messages over Kafka and broadcast them to some other node, say, hey, there's a file that's been uploaded. You should download it and process it. Or, I could send an email saying, hey, this file's been here. It's been uploaded. Do you want to inspect it? Whatever, right? You could do all sorts of workflow stuff here, right? This is a very interesting opportunity. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to create a message handler, right? A new generic handler for the Apache Mina FTP event. Okay. Okay, there we go. Good. and .get. Cool. So there's that. And I just want to log things out, right? I just want to print out the message having arrived. Log for J. Here we go. Log.info. New file. No, new event, I guess. That's right. And it'll be Apache Mina.ftp event. Get the class, get the name. Okay. And we want the session. The session is actually the current associated session. So it's always useful to debug that just to see. Okay, so I'm just logging it. I mean, there's nothing special there. I can place that with a lambda, and we're off. Now let's run this code again. Restart. Okay. So now this system is using a user manager that I created here. It's an FTP user manager that does SQL, right? So when it wants to find out who has a valid account and who can log in, it asks the user manager. The user manager just uses the JDBC template. It looks up the data, maps the results from rows in the database into user objects. I created a subclass of the user type that they require you to use. And so my user type is just this very simple thing here. And I hydrate that by looking at the data in the database, right? So my FTP User Manager is what it's using behind the scenes. It's just doing JDBC. So when I log in with an FTP client like this, right, it's going to look at the host, username, password, which is just PW, and the port, and it's going to connect. And it's going to connect, and when it connects, we'll see an event. Okay, so session opened event. Okay. And there's some logging here as well, but this is the event. This is the thing that we printed out, right? That's what's actually being done behind the scenes. The table, of course, in Postgres looks like this, right? So I have an ID, username, password, enabled, and admin. Enabled means is it a valid account? Admin means can I do writes as opposed to just reads, right? So those are my two users. Jay Long, that's me, and of course Gary Russell, lead of Spring integration, right there. So now I've got a file system. Let's rename this file, shall we? Rename it to whatever, 212. And now when you go down, there's a new event. Default FTP session, path moved event. So you can actually do some very interesting stuff there, right? Now this only works if you're using Apache Mina, the Apache Mina based FTP server, which you could. It works, it's scalable, it handles a lot of users, and it's Java code, so you can operationalize it pretty simply. Okay, so now we've got an FTP server. Let's look at some of the support that Spring Integration has for actually processing data from an FTP server, right? And we've looked at this is integration code that we've added, right? This one little bit of code here is new in Spring Integration. This ability to listen for events that can be useful in of itself. But there's still also very cool support for using FTP as a client. So let's go back to start.spring.io and create a new project. So we're going to go here. We're going to create a new project called FTP integration. All right, I'm going to use the latest and greatest Spring integration, Java 13, and I want Spring integration. I want Lombok. Okay, and I think that's it. I think that's enough. The code, by the way, the build for the Apache Mina FTP server, I have this FTP server core, and I have Spring integration FTP and Spring Boot starter integration, and my Postgres database, right? That's obviously. So I'm going to end up copying these last three dependencies for my client code here. So UAO FTP integration, open that up. Okay. Alrighty. So here we are, FTP integration. And let's go to our build. Paste this in. All right. So that's most of what we need. I've already got Spring Boot starter integration. I guess that's redundant. Let's get rid of that. And now we can actually write the code. So there's several different ways to use the new FTP support from Spring integration. But before we do that, I'm going to make sure that we have some credentials. Naturally, you should not do this in your hard-coded properties, but I'm going to do that because I need to connect. And I'm just doing a demo here, right? So keep this inside of the Spring Cloud config server, encrypt the passwords, use Vault if you need to, maybe. But, make sure you do something better than what I'm doing. So username is JLong. Password is what? Password equals PW. Okay. Port equals 7777. Nope, wrong one. Okay. And FTP1 dot host equals localhost. Okay. Good. Command C. And then FTP2. Good. So it'll be a GRUSSELL. I hope that's what I have here. Yeah, it's what I have. So otherwise, these are all the same. Laughably insecure. Don't do this. Okay, so now we've got our integration application, and we've got some credentials that we can use to then connect. What I want to do now is demonstrate, first and foremost, the lowest level, sort of simplest integration you've got available to you when it comes to FTP, namely the FTP template. So let's create a FTP template configuration class, I guess. FTP template configuration. Okay. So a configuration is going to do a few things. It's going to configure a default FTP session factory. You'll find that we do that quite a bit in today's letter, video. So we're going to create a connection factory, basically a session factory. So default FTP session factory. Okay, and notice that this is actually an abstraction, right? Abstract session factory. You can see, there's a couple of them even in the class path, but we use this session factory thing for lots of other adapters. So SFTP, FTPS, etc. That is new, I think. I don't think I did that. Like that code is fairly new. So let's see what we got here. Download the source code. Still downloading. There you go. So that's, maybe that's not new. Session factory. Mark Fisher 2.0. That's a long time ago. So, maybe my memory is just worse than I remember it being. This is the original FTP stuff, right? Good stuff. And go here. Inbound. This is the original. So there's, you can see this is old, very old. This is the original AWAN fold. And there's similar support for FTPS and all that stuff that was patterned off this that I contributed. So like a lot of stuff, you can see it's been made a lot better in the intervening decade and a half, right, or decade and some change. So we've got now the default FTP session factory. What is this going to do? Well, it's going to connect. So we create the session, new default FTP session factory. Okay, see there's FTPS. I don't want that one. And session is going to have some configuration. So we want to say session dot set password. So we need the password here. We need a few things. String PW, string user, string host, int port. Okay. So we're going to inject those in a second, but let's just set this up. Good. Set host session dot set port. Okay. Return session. Now, I need to actually inject, I need to dereference those values from my configuration. So this will be called FTP1.username, FTP1.username. Okay, that's valid. And we want the password. Okay. And then we want the host. And then the port. All right, almost there. Good stuff. Look at that, huh? So there's our default session factory. That's it. I think that's actually enough. So we can just return that. I'm happy with that. If I were a little bit, in Kotlin I can avoid this, but in Java you have to. I wonder if this would work. Let's try it. Can I do that? Oh, I have to do it inside of a initializer, don't I? Like I something about having to avoid calling set this, set that makes me happy. But to each their own. I'm not even sure if this will. There might be some life cycle thing that I'm failing to take care of, so this may not work. But at least it has the advantage of not requiring me to, specify all this stuff again. I can just inline it. A constructor would have been nice, don't you think? Let's see. All right, there we go. So there's my simple FTP session factory. Now, in order for this to work, I need an FTP remote file template. So that's another bean. Okay, at bean. Good. FTP remote file template. Okay. Return new FTP remote file template, and of course this is going to require a pointer to our just minted default FTP session factory. Okay, and here we go. Nice. And finally, we need, we want to demonstrate this actually working. So I'm going to create an event listener, or in this case, I'll just create a bean that's an application listener, so I can get dependency injection. So let's see, application listener, application ready event, init. It'll be FTP remote file template, return new application listener. Okay. And what are we going to do? We're going to actually use the template. We're going to say, okay, template dot execute, and I can execute with a callback or I can execute something against a currently authenticated session. That's what I'm going to do here. Say session. Okay. And we're going to log the data out. So var file equals new file system dot get property user.home desktop. We need a new file as well, so it's two files actually. So hello local.txt. Okay, that's my local file. And what I want to do is I want to get some data from the remote system, read it into this local file. So I'm going to say try var file output stream equals new file output stream file, and we're using the auto closable scope here. So session.read. We're going to read a file on the remote system called hello.txt and read it into the file output stream. Okay, and log.info read. We don't have a logger, of course not. Okay, so file get absolute path. Okay, return null. Good stuff. So there you go. There's our code base here, right? Let's see if that works. So in order for this to work, we have to log into the FTP server. We should find a file called hello.txt for FTP user 1. So that's localhost jlong pw 7777 quick connect. There's a file called hello.txt. You can see that corresponds here, desktop cd root 1 home called hello.txt, and it says yo. So now what do I have on the desktop? I don't have hello. I don't have hello local. So let's run this code and see what we get. Okay, so this is our first integration. Okay, read this and desktop hello local.txt cat desktop hello local.txt. There it is. So we've successfully integrated by using that template, right? So that's not it. That's not even technically speaking Spring integration. It's just cool that there's a remote an FTP template basically that allows you to do cool stuff like that. So okay, so we've got now an FTP template. Let's just put this under a profile. We don't want to run this again. I'm gonna, hide these things until we activate them again. Okay, so now that's one level of integration. We can go a step further, and we can use the inbound adapter, right, to read data based on events and publish them into Spring integration. So inbound configuration. Okay, and this is just going to be a configuration class, and it's going to be a regular bean. I'm going to copy and paste the FTP session factory from the FTP template configuration because I should. Okay, here's this, and here. Cool. So, got this now. What we want to do is create an inbound flow, an integration flow. So integration flow, inbound, FTP adapter flow. Okay. Okay. Return. We're going to create an FTP adapter first. So I guess we should say FTP equals FTP.inbound adapter. And in order to do this, we're going to need a pointer to our default session factory, FTP session factory, FTP, I should give it a better name than FTP. Okay. Okay. And then from here, we're going to auto create the directory. So yes, true. Good. We're going to listen for any new files that match a certain pattern of *.txt on the remote file system, and the local directory to which we're going to synchronize is going to be a file. We're just going to create a new file here. I can grab that same file from the other class, basically something like that. Okay, paste that in there. So now we're going to create a local file system here, local, and I like to just assert that it's going to be available is true. File dot exists or file dot make dears. Okay. Good. Okay. So we've got now just some, a very, very cool thing there. File. And I think that's the extent of our adapter. Now we can actually use the adapter in the pipeline, right? And so the way you do that is you just say return integration flows dot from spec, where that's the FTP part right here, and then we're going to create a poller. So we have to specify polling config. Okay. And that's going to be, what do we need? It's a poller that we're going to pull at a fixed rate. So poller.pc, pc.poller, okay, pm to pm.metadata, okay, sorry, fixed rate, I guess. Yeah, I want to do fixed rate. And let's say I want to do 1,000 milliseconds, okay, 1,000 milliseconds, not minutes, definitely not minutes. So that's a second, basically. I could have just done 1 second if I were thinking about it. And when the data, when it's pulling every second, I'm going to process the file and the message headers. Okay. .get. And here, we're just going to log it out. So log.info as before, log for J. Okay. F. So new file F dot get absolute path. Get payload dot get absolute path. Right. Well, do we want to do that? Yeah, I guess so. So let's see. Handle. I'm going to plug in a new generic handler just like before. But notice that in this case, the object that we're given is a file, Java IO file. And the reason is because it's downloaded the file from the remote service and installed it on our local machine in that directory. So the pointer that we're given here is actually the local file, not the remote file, right? So log.info file, file.get absolute path. Okay. There we go. Cool. So there's that, right? That's the basic arrangement there. We can run this, right? Let's see what that gives us. Okay. Cool. So it has transferred from hello.txt. We got local desktop hello, right? Where's our directory here? Okay, so local hello.txt, just created right now. So get rid of that, delete it, run this again, see what we get. Cool. There it is again, right? So it's clearly working. It's pulling that directory, and it first starts pulling. It sees a new file. Let's go ahead and now add a new file to that system. So I'm going to duplicate this file if I can. Let's see. Well, I guess I can just rename it. Let's see if that does it again. And it successfully saw the changed file, downloaded that again. So here we are, right? So it's pulling it from the remote file system and downloading it. And again, in this case, it doesn't matter what FTP server I'm using. Right now, I'm using Apache Mina again, but it could have been any FTP server. This is a client-side integration. But again, this is pulling. It has to wait every second. So if I really wanted to do this as soon as an event happens, I could have instead written this code to listen for a message coming over Kafka or something that was produced on the FTP server side over here, right? Now that we did all that integration config, this could have published a message to Kafka whenever there's a new file. And then here, rather than pulling in the FTP server directory directly, I would have been given a message through Kafka or RabbitMQ or whatever, right? That would have been nice, right? But if you don't have that, then this is a really nice solution. It's a nice poller, does most of the work for you. And remember, one question people often have is, okay, well, if this is going to read and start downloading everything that it sees every second, what if somebody is uploading a file that takes, let's say it's a 5 gigabyte file, right? It's a very big file, and it takes more than a second to upload it. Well, the trick there is to make the client rename it. So have the client upload it to something that does not match this mask, asterisk.txt. If they uploaded it as, hello.tmp, And as soon as the client that's pushing the file up to the FTP server has finished uploading it, then the client renames it to hello.txt. As soon as it's hello.txt, that operation doesn't take any time at all. Uploading it does, but renaming something is almost always a very quick, instantaneous, atomic update for most file systems. So you could then rename it, and then suddenly the next scan, it would see it, but it won't see it before that. So you can take as long as you need to upload it. Make sure you have 100% of the file uploaded, and then you rename it, right? That's a very common question people get. Okay, so we've got that inbound configuration. That's an inbound adapter. Pretty common kind of thing. You could have done that. That's basically the integration that was there 10 years ago, right? What's nice and new is the gateway, okay? So what I want to do with the gateway is upload some data. And what I want to actually have some way to, based on some criteria, upload the data to one account or the other. Basically, imagine I've got a Spring integration adapter. It's listening for messages. As the messages arrive, I need something in the payload of that message to determine to what user's account the message should be uploaded. Well, that's something that I need to customize. I need to change the adapter somehow, right? But I've only got one adapter. I don't have two different adapters for two different accounts. I've got one outbound. I've only got one FTP destination, right, in the code, and I wanted to switch from one connection factory to the other, from one session factory to the other. And so we can do that thanks to some very cool support in Spring integration in the gateway. So let's now let's profile this out. So it's basically commented out. We're going to call this inbound. So now that won't run anymore. And I'm going to copy and paste this code here. Okay. And we're going to create a gateway configuration. Gateway configuration. All right. Alrighty. There's one, and here's two. So I'm going to create two different endpoints. Okay. I guess I could just make this private, and the only thing, since you and I both know everything else is the same, we'll change this. Actually, we want that, don't we? We want all those things. There you go. So let's get rid of the configuration there. Get rid of that. Get rid of this. And this. Build default. Cool. So there's that. Okay, there's our builder, and then we're going to create two of them. Basically, everything else is as it was before. So one. Okay, and here I'm going to take these strings. Okay, there's one. So I'm just going to say return build user pw host and port, and two, same basic structure, FTP 2 2 2 2. Good stuff. So there's two. Now I need to create a delegating session factory. So even though I've got two different session factories, that's not the one I'm going to plug into my Spring integration flow, right? These are actually going to be, there's going to be a gateway, there's going to be a router, there's going to be something that's going to look at the incoming message and then delegate to either one or two, okay? That's this delegating one. So it's a bean, delegating session factory, okay, for an FTP file. So DSF, and the DSF needs a map to default FTP session factory. So a map of bean names to default FTP session factory. Okay. FTP session factory map. Turn new. Delegating. Session factory. FTP session factories.get. Get. Okay. So the question is, given a string, how do I locate a session factory? Well, of course, I'm just going to use the bean name, right? I mean, that works for me. So here we go. That's it. It's a very simple structure there. Now we have to do the actual Spring integration code, and that code is going to be a simple gateway. So we're going to use the delegating session factory and an FTP remote template. We need to create one of those. So let's say we need a FTP remote file template. Okay. And var template equals new FTP remote file template. And we're going to plug in the delegating session factory. So delegating DSF for FTP files. That's this bean that we already just created. And template.set remote directory expression. Okay, and it's just going to be literal expression. Good. Return template. Cool. So now we've got our FTP remote file template, and the only thing that's left is the gateway, right? The actual gateway code itself, and then some way to kick off the pipeline, basically. So let's configure the gateway. The gateway is not such a big deal, actually. I mean, the delegating session factory does most of the work. The gateway code itself is just the pipeline, basically. So let's create a simple pipeline. We're going to say integration flow gateway. Whoa. Okay. Integration flow. And we're going to say, given a flow dot channel, data is going to come from a message channel. Bean message channel incoming, and return message channels dot direct dot get. Okay. This dot incoming. And then from there, we want to handle the data with a generic handler, just like before. So new generic handler. FTP file. Okay. Good. We're going to handle it, and once we have the data, once we have the message, what we want to do is examine the incoming file, and then set up something so that the delegating session factory can know to whom the message should be routed. Okay. The thing that we can do is we set up the thread key, basically. The thread key is again, it's a thread local, basically, but it's also the thing that the delegating session factory knows to use. So let's inject that here. We're going to use the FTP remote file template. Whoa. FTP remote file template. And the delegating session factory for FTP files. Okay. And we say, let's just make this DSF. Good. So here we say DSF dot set thread key. It's an object. In this case, what we're gonna take is a string. I'm assuming that actually what we're gonna get in is not a file. It's gonna be a string. So let's just leave this out. Actually, it'll be some sort of object, so we can leave it like that. And that means that this is just an object and FTP file, and it'll just be, let's just call it key, easier that way. Okay. So we put in the key, and then we return the key to the next line in the processing. And once it gets past that, it goes to the next handler, where of course we're then going to write it out. So we're going to read data from something. We're going to route it through the DSF set thread key. That'll set up the delegating session factory to then know where to send the next file that it receives, which it's going to then get once we send it out using the FTP outbound gateway. Okay, like that. So FTP outbound gateway, and here we say template abstract remote file outbound gateway dot what's it called? Command. Dot command dot put, and we're going to evaluate a spell expression to get the payload of the current message. And then if the file already exists, we want to have a say in what happens. So we say file exists mode. Come on. Dot ignore. And dot options. And we put abstract remote file outbound gateway. Dot option. Dot recursive. All right. And once that's done, we're going to get another, because it's a gateway, it's not going to it's not an outbound adapter, so it's going to send the file out, but then it's going to produce an outbound message, another thing that will tell us what just happened, basically, and we can now process it. So we can say handle, and here, I'm going to get a generic key again. It's the same key, right? And headers, and I want to just log. I want to clear the DSF, basically. Set, clear key, and now I'm going to return null to abort further processing. Cool. So there's the entire pipeline. At least that should be the entire pipeline. And it's not actually that much code if you think about it, right? What I'm doing is I'm not sure if actually that's required. Is it? Looks like it's not. Okay, so what I've got here is an object, message headers. I'm setting the key, sending the data on the outbound gateway. It's going to upload the file, which is the payload, which is also the key, right? That's what we're using. And it's then going to check if it exists. If it doesn't, if it does, it'll ignore it. And then we're going to clear it when we're done. So set the key, write it, clear the key. That's all. That's the entire pipeline. Now we need some way to actually kick off the pipeline, right? So, a lot of things we could do here, but it's simple enough to just, what if we had some sort of HTTP endpoint, something like that. So I could go back to my application, my build, and we can just add in Spring Boot Starter Web. Okay, good stuff. There's the web endpoint, and I'm going to create this is not a functional, this is not a reactive endpoint, but it is a functional endpoint. So very svelte API, router function. Okay, server response. server response, please. There it is. How bizarre. Routes. Okay. So what are we saying? We're saying we want the incoming channel, this dot incoming, and we want to take any messages that come in from the HTTP endpoint. So route dot post, store FSN. Okay. New handler function, and then just build it. Okay. Okay, so now we've got the incoming message. We want to get the current FSN, that's going to be the file system name, basically. So var name equals server request dot path variable FSN. Cool. There's this. And the message equals message builder dot with payload. The payload is the name, and then build. And we're going to just send it. So was it sent? We say incoming channel dot send message. It's a Boolean, and we're just going to return a response. So server response dot okay, I guess, whatever, it doesn't matter. Dot body is the value here. Let's see if that works. Whew. All right, so we've got a route. We're going to send a message into the incoming channel. When the incoming channel sees the message, it's going to get routed to this gateway flow, right? Which is going to read the message from the channel. It's going to take the key that is the thing that we're sending in the channel. It's going to set the thread key on that. It's going to upload the file, and then it's going to clear the thread key. When it gets uploaded, in order for this gateway to do its work, we're using the template. Remember, our template in turn is using the delegating session factory, and the delegating session factory in turn is picking from one of two different session factories, and it's going to use the key that it's given to pick that, and it's going to use that by going to the map and using the key. So the key in this case is just going to be a file named 1 or 2, right? So let's see if that works. Let's actually log out the FTP session factory map. Otherwise, we won't get very far. Okay. I want the logger here. Goody. Restart. Okay, up and running. Did you see there? 2 is the name of one gateway config object, and 1 is the other one. So it knows about the two different beans. Those are the keys. Now we know the application's up and running, so we can make a post to this endpoint, store FSN, and it'll actually trigger the pipeline. So let's try that. Okay, so curl -x post HTTP localhost 8080 store 1. Okay, true. Let's see if that worked. File has been transferred to this for writing, and it got, the system gave it a name because we didn't bother specifying the name, but you can see it wrote that file to 1. Let's see if it's actually in the directory here on the local machine. So local, sorry, wrong one, root 1 home. So let's get rid of all that and try again. There's the file. Okay, what about 2? Well, first let's go back up to 2. Here's 1, here's 2. Gonna delete all that, and now goodbye 2. There's the file. Okay, so you can see it's working, right? I'm able to based on some arbitrary key. In this case, I just used the name of the beans, and I said, okay, if a HTTP request comes in with one, use the bean named one. It's not very original. I'm sure you can think of more interesting characteristics. For example, some header in the message, or some header in the HTTP request that identifies the user, and you figure out which session factory he should be using, and then create a key that corresponds to that or something, right? I mean, there's a lot more interesting things you could do, but this does work. So, my friends, we have looked at just a lot of different sort of ways to use the FTP support and Spring integration. I know this is probably way more than you ever wanted to know about FTP, but I just love this kind of stuff. I love that it's so easy to connect services and systems that don't otherwise want to be connected. Spring integration was made for this kind of stuff. And of course, what happens if you do get a file? Okay, you've got an event. You publish the event to something over a Kafka broker or RabbitMQ or whatever. You download it, put it in a file system, or put it in a queue or something. And then what happens when it gets picked up off the queue? Well, now something needs to process it, and this is where you could use Spring Batch. Maybe there's a lot of data in there. You need to read the data and turn it into updates to the system, right? Spring Batch is great for that kind of stuff. So, Spring integration is really, I think of it as the glue code of Spring, right? It's the thing that connects services and systems that don't want to talk to each other. And once you've got that, then you can actually start processing. You can do your analytics and your and so on. So, good stuff. I hope you learned something. I hope you got something out of this. Give Spring integration a try. This kind of stuff is, I bet you've got in your organization, if you work for a large enough organization, I bet you have middleware that your organization has paid millions of dollars for, that you can just throw away, because it's all that middleware is doing is giving you file synchronization. So I guess that's my message to you, my friends. More deploys to production, less golf game driven middleware. All right. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you got something out of it, as usual. And we will see you next time.